1,000 years before modern science, before universities in Europe, before the Renaissance even had a name. There was a city whose glow reached the ends of the earth. A city whose libraries were larger than palaces, whose scholars were treated like generals, whose streets buzzed with merchants, poets, philosophers, and dreamers. Travelers said its night lamps shone so brightly that they rivaled the stars themselves. This city was Baghdad, and its rise marked the beginning of an age the world would never forget: Islam's golden age. But the golden age did not appear suddenly. It rose from struggle, disappointment, hope, and a quiet revolution brewing far from the palaces of power. In the mid-700s, the Muslim world was ruled by the Umayyad dynasty. They had created an empire stretching from Spain all the way to India, one of the largest ever seen. Their armies were powerful, their borders vast, their rule strict, but beneath the surface, anger simmered. Many felt the Umayyads had drifted away from the values of Islam's early leadership. People complained the caliphs lived in luxury while ordinary citizens struggled. Non-Arab Muslims felt ignored. Scholars accused the rulers of turning the caliphate into a family kingdom. The spiritual heart of the empire, they said, was being replaced by palaces of marble and gold. And in the far eastern provinces, places like Persia, Khorasan, and Central Asia, a whisper began spreading, a promise. A message carried quietly from marketplace to home. From soldier to scholar, a new leader from the family of the Prophet will rise and restore justice. To the hopeful, this was more than a rumor. It was a lifeline. The family chosen to represent this hope was the Abbasid family descendants of al-Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad. They weren't powerful at the time. They didn't lead armies or rule provinces. But they had something the Umayyads lacked: legitimacy, humility, and a connection to the Prophet's bloodline. Their name spoke to the heart. In 747 CE, the whisper turned into a storm. A mysterious leader appeared in Khorasan, a man known as Abu Muslim. No one knows his full origin. Some said he was Persian, others said he was Arab. Some believed he was a freed slave, but everyone agreed on one thing: he was unstoppable. Charismatic, strategic, disciplined, Abu Muslim united Persians, Arabs, converts, warriors, farmers, tribes, and scholars under a single banner. Not a banner of wealth or revenge, but a banner of rebirth. Black banners rose across the East, chosen to symbolize mourning for injustice and the dawn of a new era. In only a few years, everything changed. In 750 CE, on the banks of the Zab River, the Umayyad army fell. The Abbasids claimed victory. The old empire collapsed, and a new world was born. But instead of celebrating conquest, the Abbasids focused on something far greater: transformation. The new leaders believed knowledge, fairness, and moral leadership should guide the empire. They didn't want a throne surrounded by old politics. They wanted a new capital, something bold, symbolic, untouched by past corruption. And so they built one. In 762 CE, Caliph al-Mansur chose a spot near the Tigris River and ordered a completely new city to rise from the earth. Architects, engineers, mathematicians, surveyors, they all worked together to create something never seen before. A perfect circle nearly 2 kilometers wide, protected by towering walls and 4 grand gates pointing toward the major regions of the world. This was Baghdad, a city designed not only for power but for brilliance. Inside the round walls stood the palaces, administration centers, and the beating heart of the caliphate. But the magic happened outside the circle, where the city expanded rapidly: markets, schools, mosques, gardens, libraries, workshops, and homes for people from every imaginable background. Within a century, Baghdad became one of the largest and wealthiest cities on earth. Imagine walking through it during the height of the Abbasid era, the smell of spices from India filling the air, silk traders from China, negotiating prices, African merchants bringing gold and ivory, scholars debating philosophy in shaded courtyards, engineers tinkering with inventions, musicians performing in elite gatherings, doctors discussing new cures, poets reciting verses by candlelight, and travelers from across the world staring in awe at what looked like a kingdom of knowledge. But Baghdad was not just wealthy, it was curious. And curiosity would become the fuel for its golden age. The Abbasids realized that if they wanted a strong empire, they needed strong minds. So instead of elevating warriors alone, they elevated scholars. Caliphs like al-Mansur, Harun al-Rashid, and al-Mamun didn't just admire knowledge, they invested in it. They funded scientists, mathematicians, translators, philosophers, historians, and medical experts. They built libraries and schools. They paid scholars enormous salaries. They brought in ideas from every culture: Greek philosophy, Persian astronomy, Indian mathematics, Syriac medicine, Egyptian engineering, Chinese papermaking. All of it was welcomed. Arabic became the language of science, uniting ideas from different civilizations into one giant intellectual ecosystem. And then came the moment that changed the world. In the early 9th century, Caliph al-Ma'mun founded the Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. But calling it a library would be an insult. It was a living engine of human progress. A university, an observatory, a translation center, a research institute, a workshop, and an innovation hub all at once. Imagine walking inside the House of Wisdom. Scribes copying rare manuscripts, scholars debating, Aristotle astronomers calculating the distance to the sun, physicians testing new medicines, mathematicians building the foundations of algebra, translators racing to bring knowledge from Greek, Sanskrit, Persian, Syriac, and Aramaic into Arabic. Muslims, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and even free-thinking philosophers worked together without barriers. The only qualification required was intelligence. Some of the greatest minds in history passed through these halls. Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra and the concept of algorithms. Ar-Razi wrote medical books that Europe used for centuries. Al-Kindi explored philosophy, optics, and mathematics. Astronomers calculated the Earth's circumference with accuracy that stunned later scientists. Engineers created mechanical devices that looked like early forms of robotics. What the Abbasids built wasn't just an empire, it was a civilization powered by ideas. A civilization where curiosity was not a luxury but a duty. But none of this was an accident. The Golden Age happened because everything aligned perfectly. Wealth from global trade, open intellectual borders, support from rulers, diverse populations mixing ideas, and a culture that saw learning as a form of worship. And so, by the 9th century, the Abbasid world was glowing brighter than any civilization on Earth. Baghdad had become a symbol of peace, knowledge, and ambition. A place where a farmer's son could become a scientist, where a trader's apprentice could become a poet, and where a young student could dream of changing the world and actually do it. And during this time, something extraordinary was about to happen. The Golden Age had begun, but its greatest innovations, greatest thinkers, and greatest stories were still ahead. As the Abbasid world stepped deeper into the 9th century, Baghdad was no longer just a capital. It had become a magnet pulling in talent, ambition, and brilliance from every corner of the empire. People didn't come to Baghdad only for wealth or trade. They came for possibility. They came because it was a place where ideas mattered, where a mind could rise higher than a sword, and where the future felt alive. From the moment travelers entered the great gates of the round city, they felt something different in the air. A sense that knowledge was respected here, that discovery was rewarded, and that the world was being reshaped inside these walls. But while traders and scholars filled the outer districts, inside the heart of the city, a revolution of the mind was underway. Scholarships were created for students who couldn't afford education. Markets had entire sections dedicated to books. Paper, recently learned from the Chinese, became common, replacing expensive parchment and making knowledge accessible to the public. Even humble shopkeepers could afford small collections, and bookbinders were among the busiest craftsmen in Baghdad. In this atmosphere of learning, the House of Wisdom became the empire's brightest jewel. By day, it hummed with debate. By night, its courtyards glowed with candlelight as scholars bent over their manuscripts, translating, copying, and experimenting. One of the rising stars inside these halls was a mathematician whose work would change the world forever. Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. He wasn't just a scholar. He was a pioneer. While studying earlier texts from India and Greece, he realized that mathematics needed a universal language, a system that allowed people to solve problems not through memorized formulas, but through logical steps. From this vision, he created algebra. A discipline so revolutionary that today, every student in every country learns its foundations. Even the word algorithm comes from his name, al-Khwarizmi. That's how deep the Abbasid influence runs into our daily lives. Across the hall, another giant worked tirelessly. Al-Razi, a physician with a sharp mind and an even sharper curiosity, began rewriting the world of medicine. He insisted on observing symptoms carefully, on testing treatments instead of relying on superstition, and on challenging accepted views, even those of previous Greek masters. His books on smallpox and measles were so advanced that European doctors studied them nearly 1,000 years later. And then there was al-Kimdi, known as the philosopher of the Arabs. He explored everything: mathematics, optics, music theory, logic, meteorology. He believed that truth could be found through reason, experimentation, and faith working together. Under his thought, philosophy was not seen as a threat to religion. It was a tool to understand God's creation more deeply. These were not isolated geniuses. They were the result of a system, a culture that believed every idea mattered. And this belief extended far beyond science. Poetry flourished like never before. Storytellers brought legends from India, Persia, and Arabia to life. Historians recorded the stories of nations. Musicians blended Persian, Arab, and Byzantine melodies. Architects designed mosques and palaces with breathtaking symmetry and elegance. Everything was connected, everything was growing, everything was aiming upward. But perhaps the most striking achievement of the Abbasids was not what they invented, but whom they welcomed. Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, Sabians, Persians, Arabs, Turks, Africans, Berbers, and countless others lived and worked together under one roof of civilization. A Christian could translate Aristotle. A Jewish physician could lead a hospital. A Persian astronomer could study the stars for the caliph. And a Muslim poet could sit beside them all, celebrating the beauty of knowledge. This diversity wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged. The Abbasids understood that genius has no single language, no single religion, no single skin color. It appears where it is nurtured. And Baghdad nurtured it better than any city of its age. Outside the capital, other cities bloomed as well. Basra became a center for language and literature. Kufa became a powerhouse of Islamic scholarship. Cairo in the west grew into a major hub under later rulers. Samarra became a magnificent military and administrative capital for a time. Everywhere the Abbasids ruled, knowledge followed, and with knowledge came innovation. Astronomers used giant instruments to measure the positions of the stars. They mapped the Earth with remarkable precision. They identified seasonal winds in the Indian Ocean, allowing sailors to travel farther and faster. They developed detailed medical encyclopedias, cataloging diseases and treatments with scientific accuracy. Some scholars experimented with chemistry called alchemy back then, trying to understand the nature of matter. Though they couldn't turn lead into gold, their experiments paved the way for modern chemistry, laboratory methods, and scientific thinking. Engineers designed water-raising machines, clocks powered by flowing water, and mechanical animals that moved with gears and weights. Travelers described these inventions with amazement, calling them wonders of the age. Meanwhile, trade connected the empire to the world. From the ports of the Indian Ocean to the markets of North Africa, from the Silk Roads of Central Asia to the spice routes of Southeast Asia, Abbasid merchants carried goods, stories, and ideas across continents. They brought back not only gold and precious materials, but new knowledge, new technologies, and new ways of thinking. All of this made the Abbasid realm feel alive, like a great heart beating across the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. But even as learning flourished, power itself began shifting. The empire had expanded so widely that governing it became increasingly complex. Local governors gained influence. Military leaders rose to prominence. New groups, such as the Turks, became essential to the Abbasid army. Yet in the midst of political changes, Baghdad remained the cultural and intellectual soul of the world. In the courts of caliphs like Harun al-Rashid, tales of generosity, wisdom, and extravagance spread far beyond the empire. European visitors returned home with stories of Baghdad's wealth and brilliance, barely believing what they had witnessed. Many later adapted these stories into legends, some even becoming part of collections like 1001 Nights. And through all of this, the Golden Age continued to shine. The Abbasids had built a world where curiosity was stronger than fear, where scholars were heroes, and where the future felt limitless. But history, as always, would soon test the strength of this civilization. For now, though, Baghdad stood at its peak, unmatched, unchallenged, and unforgettable. Baghdad in the 9th century felt like the center of the universe. Its libraries stretched farther than the eye could see. Its markets overflowed with goods from 3 continents. and its scholars worked with a confidence that made people believe anything was possible. But while the city glowed brighter than any jewel of its time, the world beyond its walls was shifting. Power, as always, was moving quietly, subtly, but unmistakably. Inside the palaces of the caliphs, debates grew more intense. Some officials wanted stricter control. Others argued for more freedom of thought. Some believed the empire needed stronger armies. Others insisted that knowledge was the true shield of the Abbasids. And in these disagreements, new forces began to rise. One of those forces was the military. As the empire expanded, the caliphs needed soldiers who were loyal only to them. They turned to talented Turkish warriors from Central Asia, skilled horsemen, disciplined fighters, and brilliant tacticians. These men were brought to Baghdad, trained, and given high positions. Over time, they became the backbone of the Abbasid army. But with military strength came political influence. While scholars debated astronomy and philosophy in the House of Wisdom, generals and commanders were quietly shaping the future of the empire. Yet even as power shifted, the Abbasid spirit of knowledge remained strong. During this period, one of the greatest minds in history emerged. Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. A child prodigy, he memorized the Quran by age 10 and mastered logic, mathematics, physics, and medicine before adulthood. When he walked into libraries, he absorbed information like a sponge. When he picked up medical books, he didn't just learn from them, he improved them. His masterpiece, the Canon of Medicine, would later dominate European medical schools for 600 years. But he wasn't alone. Ibn al-Haytham, the father of optics, conducted experiments that laid the foundation for the scientific method. He proved that the eye works by receiving light, not emitting it, a discovery that rewrote centuries of understanding. He used dark rooms, controlled lighting, and mathematical calculations to explain vision, reflection, refraction, and lenses. His work would eventually inspire the development of cameras, telescopes, and even modern physics. Farther east in Khorasan, another genius was changing the way people understood life itself. Al-Biruni, a historian, mathematician, astronomer, and geographer, measured the Earth's radius with astonishing accuracy, using nothing but shadows and geometry. He wrote books about India, its culture, its science, its languages, and its beliefs with a level of respect and curiosity centuries ahead of his time. These men were not merely scholars, they were explorers of truth. And they thrived because the Abbasid world allowed them to ask questions that other civilizations feared. They believed that God had created a universe filled with patterns, laws, and wonders, and that by studying it they were honoring their faith. This harmony between science and spirituality was one of the most powerful engines of the Golden Age, but even the brightest era faces shadows. As the Abbasid Empire grew older, wealth and luxury began to change its rulers. Some caliphs became deeply involved in art, poetry, and philosophy, but ignored politics. Others spent fortunes on palaces while provinces demanded justice. Governors in far-off regions started acting independently. Revolts broke out. And the unity that once defined the empire slowly began to weaken. Meanwhile, new powers watched from the edges. In the west, the Umayyads, thought to be destroyed, rose again in Spain, building a new kingdom in Cordoba that would also become a center of learning. In North Africa, Berber dynasties claimed independence. In Egypt, powerful families took control. In Persia, new movements and local rulers challenged Baghdad's authority. Yet, remarkably, even as the Abbasid political structure weakened, the intellectual spirit continued. Students still filled lecture halls. Libraries kept expanding. Scholars continued questioning, learning, discovering. And this was the true power of the Golden Age. It had become bigger than politics, bigger than borders, bigger than the empire itself. It had become a culture where learning was respected, where translating a book was seen as an act of greatness, where creating knowledge was a path to immortality, where minds were valued more than swords. As the centuries passed, Baghdad kept attracting thinkers from every land. In the markets, you could hear 10 languages spoken at once. In the observatories, charts of the stars grew more complex. In hospitals, doctors treated patients according to scientific principles, not superstition. These hospitals, called Bimaristans, were some of the earliest true medical centers in the world. Patients were separated by illness, treated by trained physicians, and given detailed records. Mental health wards existed at a time when the rest of the world believed mental patients were possessed. Medicines were categorized. Surgeries were performed, students learned from real cases. It was a system so advanced that modern historians describe it as centuries ahead of its time. Everywhere you looked, progress was unfolding. Even navigation changed. Abbasid geographers collected maps from sailors across the Indian Ocean and combined them with their own astronomical observations. They charted coastlines, recorded monsoon winds, and studied ocean currents. Their work allowed ships to travel farther than ever before, connecting Africa, Arabia, Persia, India, and China in a vibrant web of trade. And still, Baghdad remained the beating heart of it all. But deep beneath the brilliance, cracks continued to grow. Political unity was fading. Rival dynasties emerged. And the golden age, though still shining, was beginning to feel the weight of history. Yet even then, Baghdad refused to let darkness win. Not yet. Not while scholars still wrote their masterpieces. Not while the House of Wisdom still stood. Not while curiosity still lit the city's nights. For now, the Abbasid Empire remained a civilization of brilliance, one that the world admired, envied, and tried desperately to understand. And soon, events would unfold that would test its strength more than ever before. Despite the brilliance of Baghdad, the Abbasid Caliphate was now facing threats that no scholar or poet could defend against. The empire's borders were vast, stretching from the Atlantic in the west to the edges of Central Asia in the east, but governing such a massive territory was becoming increasingly difficult. Provinces began to assert their independence, often ignoring the caliph's orders entirely. Governors collected taxes for themselves, local armies enforced their own laws, and in some areas, the caliph's authority was little more than a distant memory. Meanwhile, Baghdad itself was changing. The city remained a hub of learning, but luxury and opulence often outweighed discipline. Some caliphs were more interested in poetry, music, and gardens than in administration or military campaigns. Palaces grew larger, gardens more elaborate, and feasts more extravagant. The streets of Baghdad thrived with merchants, travelers, and scholars, but at the same time, the city faced unrest, poverty, and corruption. The Abbasids relied heavily on their elite military forces, the Khorasanis, the Turkish slave soldiers, and other specialized units. These soldiers were fiercely loyal, well-trained, and highly effective on the battlefield, but their growing influence over political affairs made the caliphs increasingly vulnerable. Decisions of state often had to be approved, or at least tolerated, by generals whose loyalty could be bought or manipulated. Power was no longer centralized. It was shared, and sometimes contested, within the palace walls themselves. This tension eventually erupted during the reign of al-Mu'tasim and his successors. The Turkish military elite, having been settled in the newly constructed city of Samarra, gained unprecedented power. They could make and unmake caliphs, deciding the fate of the empire with the sweep of a sword. Political assassination became a recurring reality, and caliphs were forced to balance their personal authority with the demands of their own army. At the same time, new dynasties were emerging outside the capital. In Egypt, the Ptolemies established a de facto independent state. In Persia, the Saffarids and later the Samanids asserted control over their territories. In North Africa, the Fatimids rose as a powerful Shiite caliphate, challenging Abbasid authority from afar. The empire that had once seemed invincible was fracturing under the weight of its own size and complexity. Yet even as the political structure weakened, the cultural and scientific achievements of the Abbasid era continued to flourish. Scholars, artists, and inventors carried on the work that had defined the Golden Age. Libraries expanded, observatories tracked the stars, and innovations in medicine, mathematics, and engineering spread across the Islamic world. Knowledge became a currency as powerful as gold, linking Baghdad to the farthest corners of the empire and beyond. One of the most remarkable aspects of this era was the House of Wisdom, or Beit al-Hikmah. Here, scholars translated works from Greek, Sanskrit, and Persian into Arabic, preserving centuries of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Mathematicians like al-Khwarizmi developed algebra and advanced arithmetic. Astronomers mapped the heavens with precision previously thought impossible. Physicians like al-Razi and Ibn Sina wrote medical encyclopedias that would influence generations of doctors both in the Islamic world and in Europe. Even technology thrived. The art of papermaking, introduced from China, revolutionized the production of books and documents. Architectural innovations produced stunning mosques, palaces, and public works. Cities across the empire, from Baghdad to Cairo to Samarra, became centers of trade, culture, and learning. Goods and ideas traveled along the Silk Road, connecting east and west in a network of commerce and knowledge. Trade, in particular, strengthened the Abbasid economy. Merchants brought silk from China, spices from India, ivory from Africa, and precious metals from Europe. Cities along trade routes flourished as markets expanded and caravans carried wealth across continents. This economic prosperity underpinned the cultural achievements of the time, allowing rulers to sponsor scholarship, art, and architecture on a scale that would have been unimaginable just a few generations earlier. But while the Abbasids built a civilization of unparalleled sophistication, they were not immune to the forces of history. The decentralization of power, the rise of powerful military elites, and the emergence of rival dynasties signaled that the empire's political days were numbered. What had begun as a unified caliphate, capable of projecting power across the Middle East and beyond, was gradually transforming into a series of loosely connected states, each with its own ambitions and agendas. And then, from the east, a force arose that no scholar, army, or caliph could hope to stop. The Mongols, fierce nomads from the steppes of Central Asia, moved with unmatched speed and brutality. Led by Hulagu Khan, they swept across Persia, destroying cities, defeating armies, and leaving devastation in their wake. Baghdad, the jewel of the Abbasid Empire, was their ultimate target. In 1258, Hulag's forces reached the city. Despite warnings, Caliph al-Mustasim believed the walls of Baghdad would protect him. They did not. The Mongols breached the city, and what followed was one of the most devastating sieges in history. The army of Baghdad was overwhelmed, the caliph captured, and the city was systematically destroyed. Tens of thousands of inhabitants were killed. Libraries, palaces, and mosques were burned. Manuscripts that had survived centuries of scholarship were thrown into the Tigris, turning its waters black with ink. The death of al-Mustasim marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate as a political power. For the first time in centuries, the city of Baghdad, once the epicenter of Islamic culture, trade, and learning, was left in ruins. Yet even in defeat, the legacy of the Abbasids endured. Their achievements in science, medicine, literature, philosophy, and architecture continue to influence the Islamic world and Europe for centuries. The Abbasids may have lost their political power, but they had created something far greater, a civilization that valued knowledge, innovation, and culture above all else. From the foundations they built, future Islamic empires would rise, preserving the golden age of the Abbasids as a shining example of human achievement. Even after the fall of Baghdad, the Abbasid lineage endured, though only as symbolic leaders. In Cairo, under the protection of the Mamluk sultans, Abbasid caliphs held ceremonial titles, serving as spiritual figureheads while real power rested with military rulers. They no longer commanded armies or levied taxes, but their name carried immense prestige. For centuries, claiming descent from the Prophet Muhammad through the Abbasids gave rulers legitimacy in the Islamic world. Meanwhile, the cultural and intellectual currents initiated during the Golden Age continued to flow. Scholars in Cairo, Damascus, and other cities built on Abbasid achievements, preserving classical texts, advancing scientific inquiry, and promoting literature. The spirit of inquiry fostered under al-Mansur, al-Rashid, and al-Man lived on in these centers of learning, influencing generations of thinkers across the Islamic world and beyond. The story of the Abbasids is also a story of resilience. Despite internal strife, revolts, and external invasions, their empire lasted over 5 centuries, longer than most in human history. They transformed the Middle East into a hub of commerce, scholarship, and culture, linking the East and West in ways that would shape global civilization. Their cities Baghdad, Samarra, Cairo, and others remained beacons of knowledge, inspiring travelers, poets, merchants, and scholars for generations. The Abbasid era is remembered not only for its political history, but for its intellectual and cultural achievements. Philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, architecture, and art all flourished under their patronage. Innovations like algebra, advances in medicine, intricate bookmaking, and the preservation of classical knowledge would later help fuel the Renaissance in Europe. Their impact transcended borders and centuries. reminding the world that human creativity and curiosity can thrive even amid political turmoil. Ultimately, the Abbasids shaped the identity of the Islamic world. They demonstrated the potential of a society built on knowledge, openness, and cultural exchange. They proved that empires could be more than military conquest. They could be centers of innovation, learning, and art. Their story, with all its triumphs and tragedies, remains a testament to human ambition and the enduring power of ideas. So when we speak of Islam's golden age, we speak of the Abbasids, a dynasty that redefined civilization, celebrated knowledge, and left a legacy that continues to inspire the world. From the bustling streets of Baghdad to the great libraries and courts, the Abbasids carved a place in history that no conqueror could erase. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the rise, glory, and legacy of the Abbasid Caliphate, don't forget to subscribe to Simple Historian, where history comes alive, and every story is an adventure waiting to be explored.